What's up, people? It's Dave, Duncan Kyle, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan Kyle and I have been checking out the new album from Bulgarian metal band Odd Crew. The band's new album, Dark Matters Part 1, will be released on May 27th via Drakkar Entertainment. So, following 5 much acclaimed albums, 2 DVDs, and countless live shows of over more than 2 decades, Dark Matters Part 1 sees Odd Crew reach their musical maturity on a new level, and one that doubles down on the band's songwriting skills and exceptional talent. Odd Crew, who grew up together since they were kids, may have stepped out as one of Bulgaria's best-kept heavy rock and metal secrets long ago, but their new album will make them indispensable for the global heavy music scene. I don't know they are one of these bands that are like everyone should know, because I had never heard of Odd Crew, even though they're like 5 albums in.
Yeah, but
I've heard of them.
I always get skeptical when a PR people tell me that I should know something. I'm like, well, that's your job as the PR to make sure that I know the band, and if I don't know the band, then I'm fairly acclimated to heavy music and I don't know about it yet. Just going to say that maybe you're not doing your job well. It's not me, it's you.
I don't know. I feel like on album 6 I should probably have heard of this band.
100%. Like when the band sounds as commercial as this, yes, we should have come across them before somewhere. So,
well, there's maybe a reason for that.
I lived in Bulgaria for 4 years and never heard of them.
Well, there you go. There you go. Fair enough. Yeah. It's maybe not our typical kind of Metal Epidemic album that we would review. This is probably a bit lighter than, in comparison to the other releases that we're reviewing tonight. But when I listen back to the 5 other albums they had, this isn't always how they sounded. If you go back to those older releases, they are far kind of thrashier, more kind of groove laden, very more metal orientated than this is. But over the last couple of releases, they've definitely been pushing a more, slightly more laid back style, ranging from a kind of melodic, kind of dark rock to maybe like its heaviest kind of progressive metal, I suppose. But the reason that I kind of picked it for review was I'd heard one of the singles way back the track was called The Moment. And I remember when I heard it, I think it was an email that came in and I clicked on it, and I was just kind of fascinated by the guy's voice. The vocals are done by a guy called Vasko Rakov. And I don't know, it was just something about his tone that was kind of speaking to me. I was like, this really, really interesting tone this guy has. And I was kind of intrigued to hear how the rest of the album would sound. I didn't realise at that point that the album would be all fairly kind of laid back or kind of restrained. I figured it was one of the kind of lighter tracks of the album, but it turns out it was one of the heavier tracks of the album. But because this album does sit within a particular kind of sphere of heaviness, I did find this was very much a kind of mood album, and if I'm totally honest, my first listen to this album was a little bit underwhelming. I just don't think I was in the frame of mind for it when I put it on the first time. The songs are all quite lengthy, like between kind of 6 and 8 minutes roughly. It's very kind of textural, very atmospheric, as I said, very kind of mood driven. So I think if you're looking for an album that's just going to like crush your soul with big heavy riffs, then this may not be that album that you're looking for. But my second listen, which was on a cold and frosty morning, Monday morning, it wasn't cold and frosty, but it was a Monday morning, and I was getting ready for work, and I stuck it on, and it went completely differently from the first listen to this album. I found it far more immersive the second time, kind of almost a kind of hypnotic type way, and I think that came from a few different things. Firstly, the flow of the album is very, very natural. There's nothing here that will feel kind of jarring or out of place. Each track just kind of seamlessly moves into the next, but at the same time, you know that you've moved on to something else. Each track has a kind of similar kind of groove to it. It's not necessarily fast or like crazily heavy, but something that keeps your kind of head moving the whole time. But even during that, like as I said, the tracks are like anywhere between like 5 and 8 minutes. They do transition in between those kind of 7-8 minute runtime. So there are like little internal parts that are moving. It's very subtle, but it's very smooth at the same time. Secondly, the other thing was that the production has a kind of a warmth and kind of ambience to it. It feels really comforting, almost like every instrument sounds very natural. There's very kind of spacious kind of guitar, lovely reverb. You can hear all the small characteristics in the drums and the guitars, and again it kind of drifts by without really kind of grabbing you by the throat, but it's always there, just kind of keeping the whole thing glued together. The third thing, where the thing that I mentioned at the beginning, the vocals, this guy has one of those voices that can kind of just tell a story. It feels weathered, but the register that he sits in is very warm. It's full of personality. Never really goes into like a kind of heavy territory. He keeps it melodic the whole time. But I honestly didn't mind that at all. He just has such a cool tone. I don't mind, if he just sing like that the whole time. I had to listen to their heavier stuff that they'd done in the past, and I much prefer this more kind of melodic tone, to be honest. So I'm all good that they've kind of moved into this style. He's just very, very good at it. Really excellent delivery, not only with the kind of hooks on the tracks, but he also puts across a lot of feeling in his vocals as well, which is not an easy thing to do. I think I mentioned the song length earlier, and I think it's one of the things that I have reservations about on this album. They've done a couple of kind of longer songs on previous albums, but this, from what I could tell, this is the first album where they're really, all the songs have a bit of length to them. And I think that works on certain tracks. The opener, for example, is a track that builds, kind of bringing in various elements before the band start to hit their stride. It feels natural, completely warranted. Other times it kind of feels like it outstays its welcome a little bit. A lot of these tracks are fairly conventional in structure. Although they have like prog tones in the riff, they're not prog songs. The band kind of remind me of Klone a little bit, in the way that they're not a prog band, but they have prog elements that kind of seep into their sound. But I feel sometimes that the Odd Crew maybe hold on to an idea for slightly too long, or maybe take slightly too long to get to the point. And then if you add in that fairly familiar tempo that the album sits in, the tracks, there's some tracks that start to feel their length a little bit. That being said, I think this is probably the best Odd Crew album that we've had to date. I've only briefly listened to the previous albums, but I think that the balance they have on this album of heaviness and melodic atmosphere is great. I think the songwriting sounds like it's definitely moved up a level, and the production, I think this is another kind of clear step forward for the band. Dynamically, it's quite subtle, but I love how natural it all sounds. Vocally, as I said, this guy, he could sing the phone book and it would sound great. I think he is definitely one of the highlights of this band and the album. I think these guys are ones to watch. I think this is one of the first album of theirs where I can hear them finding their own kind of sound, and they're delivering an album that sounds like Odd Crew rather than just sounding like a bunch of other bands. Like, I think if I heard this in a bar or in a club, I think I would know it's Odd Crew. There is something quite distinctive. It's mainly in the vocals, but there is something very distinctive about the band themselves. This is an interesting one. Definitely a band I'm going to keep an eye on. An enjoyable album, but definitely a mood album, something that I have to be in the kind of frame of mind to listen to. Kyle.
Hello.
Being from or living in Bulgaria for 4 years. But not having heard of Odd Crew, what did you think of this album?
I tell you what, when I saw the name, I was like, that's a Bulgarian name.
Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, there's loads of bands out there with names like Odd Crew and Bang Fuck or whatever, I don't know.
Nice.
There probably is.
See if we can get the PR company to send us through Bang Fuck. Looking forward to reviewing that album.
Man, the thing is, Bulgaria is hiding away some of the best local metal bands I've ever seen in my life. I'm not kidding. They just don't give a shit. They're just unbelievable. They'll just be like, if we want a fucking huge breakdown in the middle of this ballad, we'll do it. And it's amazing. I saw one band doing, and I think I've talked about them before when I was in Varna, and they did this just ridiculously, stupidly heavy cover of Ricky Martin.
Yeah.
And it was nuts. And I was just like, this is brilliant. They didn't sing clean at all the whole song, and it was just like, holy fuck, it was great. So Bulgaria is definitely hiding a lot of gems. But this one I didn't really get along with that well.
Oh, really?
No, it's all right for the first few songs, but I thought I felt like after the first like 2, 3, 4 songs, I kind of heard almost everything they had to offer. If you know what I mean? It's just like the rest of the album just sort of went on in that direction.
Yeah.
And I started to sort of predict where things were going to happen in the songs as well. Like in the last third, you've got a solo and hey, this and that, and there's a bit of a breakdown here. Well, I'd say breakdown, a bit of a bridge here and there. And it's like, I just sort of, I don't know. It sounds very nice. I agree with most of what you said. It's very well produced. It sounds very nice. It's very comforting. I think it'd be a very good sort of background album if you're doing something like, you're working away and you got this on the background. It'd be great for stuff like that. But it didn't really hold my attention. And I like the guy's, like you said, the guy's vocal tone. It's very interesting, but he doesn't really go out of that at all very often. It's very sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say monotone because it's not, but he just doesn't extend it one way or the other. He just sort of sits there the whole way through, and it's a 52-minute album, and it's like, whew.
Yeah.
It felt like 52 minutes for me. So it was like, they're clearly very good musicians, and they're very good at what they do, and they've definitely matured in their songwriting ability from what I've heard. But it's like, it just sort of meandered around too much for me. It wasn't very... It just didn't grab me very well. It was like they have a lot to offer, but it's sort of all spent in the first few songs, and then it's like, well, what else is there? And they're like, more songs of the same. And I'm like, no thanks. But I did like the production. The production's very natural. I liked what you said about the prog tones. That's what I was thinking when I first listened through. The guitar tones are very progressive and stuff, and it's not super heavy, but there is a little bit of bite in the guitar sometimes and stuff, and you can hear everything, and the drums especially sound really nice. They're super natural, and you can hear all the ghost notes and all the little details. I really like it. So absolute thumbs up to them on that. But otherwise, yeah, it's an alright listen, but I'd probably have it on in the background if I go back to it. But other than that, I'll probably be like, nah, that's enough for me.
Okay. Fair enough. Duncan?
Yeah, I pushed us to this because you mentioned this, and we listened after one of our reaction videos. We listened to a track. Granted, the track was about 7 minutes long, and I skipped 4 minutes into it, and I listened to about a minute. I was like, yeah, I'm down to Klone on this. I don't know if that was the right judgment. I think the biggest problem I have with this release overall is its lack of dynamics.
Yeah,
overall.
Very subtle,
Yeah.
I think what they do incredibly well, and it's nuanced to a point. I think those nuances at time are so subtle though, that unless you're really paying attention to what everyone's doing in the band, they can be quite clever with something and you completely fucking miss it. And then on the second or third listen, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool that, but I didn't pick it up on the first listen. And I think we live now in a time period where first listens are almost everything. I know from a review point of view, we kind of have to go back to that a few times to formulate an opinion. But my kind of biggest kind of issue overall is a lot of that mission statement that you read at the start about this kind of putting them on the map. I don't know if this necessarily does put them on the map in the way that the press statement says. I think they're clearly very talented. It frustrates me, having not gone through the back catalogue, to hear you say that there was thrashier elements in the past, Because something with a little bit of oomph and a little bit of pace anywhere else in this album, even for like a couple of bars, would break up some of what they do.
Yeah.
Vocally, I think he does have a great tone. Sadly, by about the second track, I realised it was a less cunty David Draymond sort of voice from Disturbed. He has a very similar nuance and a very similar cadence without the whingy whininess of David Draymond. And then after that, all I could imagine was twin piercings in the chin and a bald head. And I was just like, oh, why did I do this to myself? He's a great singer. He's a great singer. I think you could put him down. That's the weird thing. Like, almost feels like the band are catering to the vocal, whereas that vocal will easily fit over multiple different styles. You could go a lot heavier, and it would work just as well. I think when we listen to the track once again on recordings that people have not heard, and outtakes that I'll never make here, I said, you know, there was a kind of a unique element of something like a Seven Dust in there. When you listen to Seven Dust, they have this like oomph behind it, and then you hear Lejean's vocals come in, and you go, that shouldn't be on this. No, that totally should be on this music. That sounds fucking great. What a great idea. This guy's vocals are maybe a bit more versatile than I think the band necessarily give him credit for. I think you could go a bit more oomph in the background, and it would just work just as well, or a bit faster, and it would work just as well. And I think that's my biggest issue. Nothing of the component parts of this album are bad. Like, the riffing is good, the production is great, the melodies are awesome, but it's 8 songs, it's 52 minutes in length, and there isn't enough elasticity in the way the songs are created in there to break them up. And you are right, you do know when a song finishes and when the next song starts, but if you're maybe not paying attention, you could be a minute into the next song before you realise you've moved on to the next song. I think that's a lot to do with pacing on the album. I think there's not enough dynamics in terms of the speed between songs. A lot of them sit within the same sort of BPM, and that's it works sometimes. You mentioned Klone. I think Klone's a great example of, weirdly, a band that does it better though. Klone have went from being a lot heavier, at times being not quite Gojira heavy, but certainly sitting in that register, to when you listen to that last album they put out, which was mostly ballad and acoustic stuff, and it was fucking mind-blowing. But they still had that dynamic in there. It was a slower album for sure, but the dynamic levels of what they did break the album out. The other band that reminded me of, weirdly at times, maybe more the progressive elements, was Dull. We covered a wee while ago. Not in any other thing other than some of the quieter song elements reminded me of stuff we heard off their previous album, which was a fucking great album. Yeah, I'm a bit conflicted, to be honest. I think this is a band that very, very easily you could plug into quite a few gigs. You could play some of their songs at rock clubs that you mentioned, or bars or whatever, and they would go down well. I just think on this album, and what is kind of giving me the fear, as this is classed as part 1. I'm kind of hoping the second movement is something a bit heavier, because I think they clearly can do that, according to you. I think they should be adding those elements in, not as a way to be heavier, but just as songwriting mechanisms to add a bit more interest to the listener. I think some of those nuances are great when you're giving it, and that's maybe the mood thing that you're talking about, Dave. When you have full attention and great headphones and time to listen to this without distractions, I think you're going to pick out a lot more than what you're going to have if it's just on in the background. Because if it's just on in the background, it's like a 53-minute song. So yeah, I don't know. I don't like. It's hard to do what this band does as well as they do it. But they do it so much that I think in some way, shape and form it becomes less special.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Okay, so ratings for this new one from Odd Crew. Yeah, when the mood strikes, I enjoyed this. But when I wasn't in the frame of mind for it, I couldn't listen to the whole album. It is a touch on the long side. And as I said, the tempo of the album doesn't really change much. The heaviness changes ever so slightly, but it's very, very subtle. Everything's very subtle on this album, to be honest. I do love the guy's voice. I think he has a great tone. And I really enjoyed the production on it as well. I'm like you, though. I think if they do come back with a part 2, I think we need to hear a little bit more variation in the intensity of the album, showing a bit of kind of greater range of dynamics on the next release. It's a tough one to score. I don't think the formula is perfect yet. I think they've got a little bit of work, but I have faith. I think there is talent in this band that they will nail it further down the road. I'm going to go 3.5 on this one. Kyle?
I think they've got talent and they've got a lot of work to do, but this just did not excite me in any way, really. So 2.5 from me.
Okay. And Duncan?
I'm stuck in the middle again. 3. Yeah.
3.
I think even on the right day, I don't know if the whole album works for me. I think a lot of it does. I would say easily 75%, but I think there's a couple of moments where and I'm usually the guy that's more forgiving of bands that want to do a lot more melody, but there's a part of me that just feels like it's time to shift gear, and the album doesn't do it, almost in a frustrating way. If anyone wants to know what that kind of the terminology is, just Google the word edging. That's kind of how I felt. I kind of felt like I was being musically edged, right on the edge, just ready to hit that attack snare, and it never came. Like
a lot of gardening websites about to get a lot of hits.
Yep. Clean gardens. Yeah, I think there's a lot. I'd be real. The thing about it was, if they played live over here, I'd go and see them. That's like I'd go and see them live. I know it, but I don't know if the whole album at the length it is works for me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if you take into consideration that back catalogue as well of the heavier stuff,
I think that's where it becomes more interesting when there's something, because they're not just going to play this whole album. You're going to get those breaks. And there are how many albums in?
This is the 6th one, I think.
Yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense to me to an extent. Well, you think about what was Metallica playing on their 6th album? Fucking Reload, was it not? The Cardium, forgive me, nah. You know what I mean? Like, so, like, you're not writing necessarily an album purely to be played live. You're writing an album to give you songs to take to an already bustling set of songs. So, from that point of view, it probably works really well. But yeah, 3 out of 5.
No probs. So that is Odd Crew Dark Matters Part 1, out on May 27th on Drakkar Entertainment. Links below to the band. If there's any pre-orders, I'll stick that in there as well. Let us know what you think once you've heard any of the singles. There's a few out just now. Let us know what you think when you've heard the album. Happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. That is the review. Thank you for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.